This is a learning space, so all questions are welcome, but respect and civility is expected in all interactions. With that, welcome to our panel on diversity in the climbing gym, hosted by the B.I.G Initiative. So my name is Eliza. My pronouns are she, her, and I'll be moderating today's conversation. About myself, alongside my work in the climbing community as an outdoor climbing instructor and co-founder of the Rock and Rise Climbing Festival in Squamish, I've had the privilege of developing and running the outdoor climbing program for the B.I.G Initiative over the last 4 years. For me, climbing has always been about more than just the movement on the wall. It's about the people. Our gyms and crags only thrive when every person, regardless of identity or background, feels safe and welcomed and celebrated. That's exactly what we'll be exploring today. How climbing gyms can actively build inclusive spaces from policy to culture to even the stories we choose to amplify. I'm honored to be joined by two leaders in the climbing community who bring deep experience, perspective, and passion to this conversation. Geneviève De La Plante and Flannery Shay-Nemirow. Geneviève, pronouns she, her, has worked in the climbing industry for over 2 decades, co-owning several climbing gyms across Canada. In 2019, she launched Bring In the Girls, the nationally renowned B.I.G Initiative, a movement dedicated to highlighting, empowering, and creating opportunities for women and gender diverse setters and climbers. Her work bridges business leadership with community building, and she continues to be a driving force for equity and representation in Canadian climbing. Flannery uses the pronouns they, them. Flan has been climbing for over 2 decades with a focus on sport and bouldering. After several seasons of competing, they shifted towards contributing behind the scenes, building their way up from forerunning and now a level 4 USAC route setter and level 3 IFSC route setter. Over the past 12 years of route setting, Flannery has worked with gyms across the country, coached competitive youth teams, and served as a climbing-specific biomechanical analyst in Boulder, Colorado. Alongside their professional setting career, Flannery pursues their own passion for hard bouldering outdoors, where they've set multiple V12s. And outside of climbing, they work with refugee and asylee youth, are pursuing a career in medicine, and organize for trans rights, bringing both technical expertise and a deep commitment to community and equity into every space they're a part of. Together, Geneviève and Flannery bring a wealth of experience from running gyms and building initiatives to shaping competitions and training athletes, all while keeping inclusion and equity at the center. So, talking about expectations, we wanted to start by sharing why we're doing this. At its core, this training is about giving you practical tools to make your home gyms more diverse, more welcoming, and more inclusive. Just as important is it's about shining a light on the specific behaviors, the everyday actions that can make the biggest difference. The learning objective for today is simple. Don't let perfect be the enemy of pretty freaking great. Change does not happen overnight, and we don't need to wait for the perfect solution to start making progress. If you leave here with just one or two concrete things that you can bring back to your gym, your team, or your colleagues, whether that's a new perspective, a small change, or a proposal you want to put forward, then that's already amazing. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to Flan to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Eliza, and thank you for that introduction. It feels like a real honor to get to be here with you all talking about something that I think is a really important next step for the climbing community at large and something that we can all be working on to improve in our climbing gyms and climbing community spaces. Before we really get into the meat of this presentation, I think it's going to be really important to sort of define some of the terms that we're working with here. So often when we talk about diversity, inclusion, equity, it all kinds of comes out in this singular word salad. But really diversity and inclusion are like very different things and demand really different things of people facilitating those experiences. So diversity is basically something that already happens. Like we live in a diverse world. There's lots of people involved. There's lots of people's different experiences involved. And that's just like a fact of what we're engaging with. Conversely, inclusion is something, these are choices that we're making, right? So someone feels included in a diverse space. And having this understanding that these things are different when we talk about them, and when we say DEI, it's actually to combine this like very large idea, will really help kind of nail down the things that we can specifically be doing to improve diversity and inclusion. Many places, climbing gyms, corporations, you name it, basically, community organizations, whatever, focus on the diversity aspect of the DEI and very rarely on the inclusion aspect. And because of that, they really fail to see like the important benefits that come from having an inclusive space. And we'll get into more of these benefits as we go through this presentation, but basically a more diverse, inclusive space leads to better employee productivity. It's like better creativity. It's a better sense of community. There's all these things that can help you both as a climber, as a friend, like as a business owner. So just to make it very clear that when we talk about diversity, that's one thing that's just like a fact that exists, and inclusion is something that we can work towards. And this quote really just drives home what I was trying to say in the last slide. And another question, or another thing that this brings up too, is that diversity is something that I think is often like tolerated, right? So there's like this idea that we must be diverse because we have to, whereas inclusion is something that we have to be striving towards. And these may sound like a lot of buzzwords, but the felt difference as someone who's feeling included versus excluded is a very real, like, different understanding of what it means in the world. And I also want to say right now that I'm saying this as like a white, queer, trans person, and that my experience of diversity and inclusion is going to be like very different than the diversity and inclusion experiences of someone who has a very different like lived experience than I do. So our goal here with this is that, I guess next slide, is that we're going to be we hope to be giving you all sort of the basis to create an inclusive space that like works well for your community, because that community is going to be very different from the community that I live in as like someone who's climbing in the southwest of the US than it is someone who's climbing in Montreal or in Toronto or in whatever. But basically like each one of those communities is going to have its own specific needs. It's going to have its own specific challenges. It's going to have its own specific like sticking points or like flashpoints for conversations. And with the right set of tools and skill sets, we hope to be able to like impart you with something to do that will be specific for your community.
Hey, so to kick off this, well, get you thinking about your own spaces and to try to like start identifying event down the line further in this presentation, things that you could apply to your spaces. We're going to start with a little poll, two little polls actually. And take a second to think, first of all, and it's anonymous, so you don't have to worry, but how do you feel about the current level of diversity in your climbing gym? Thinking about the definitions, obviously, that Flan just shared with us. So if you could take a second to, does everyone see the poll? Are people responding? Okay. While you're doing this, I'm going to shout out to Lee, who's sitting next to me and is doing the technical aspect behind here and has been a driving force of B.I.G with this. So, thanks, Lee. All right. So I think. All right. So, well, that's actually a little bit encouraging. We'll look at the results after, but it's good to see that people are feeling like some changes are already happening, that they're seeing changes maybe in their current environment. But obviously there are some folks still who feel that that potentially their community is still a bit homogenous looking. So we'll get into those things a little later. And then the second poll that I'll have you complete. How do you feel about the current level of inclusion in your climbing gym? All right. Perfect. Here, here we see a difference in the results. So more people still feel, many of you still feel like they're like, although there are improvements that have happened in their spaces, that there's room for improvement. And here, but nobody who's 100% happy with the level of, oh, I forgot to change that, but of inclusion within their and the type of inclusion within their space. So we'll think about that. We'll take kind of those answers and and then take a minute and think about how you answered. And if you come up with, just think about the things that make you feel like, what are the things that can be improved in the space? What are like, just put them into the chat, like things that make you that you feel have room for improvement in terms of inclusion. Like, what can your gym do? What can the community do? What are things that make you currently feel excluded? Or if you know that you have friends who feel excluded, what are those experiences that they're seeing? So what makes you feel excluded, but also what does make you feel included in a time where you have entered the gym and you were like, oh yeah, this is a space for me. What are those things that are happening in the gym to make you feel included? So if you take a minute to, is if you put them in the chat if you feel comfortable. If not, we will have some answers for you as well. Oops. Oh. So I'll, oh, we have a comment that got dropped. Oh. I understand we're just warming up now. So if you don't feel comfortable to share, that's fine as well. Oh, there. Shireen shared. I see that. So good. Yeah, I agree. So love going to a new gym and seeing posters, adverts for queer nights, PWIC nights, adaptive events, or long-term programming. Great way to demonstrate inclusiveness. Agreed. So signage, big emphasis on community nights and solid effort from Pedro, and accessibility for people to come and climb. Amazing. And then great, in New Jersey, I feel like we have community nights. Accessibility is less of a focus. Yeah, we'll kind of get into that, but often inclusion overlooks certain groups. There's a big focus right now on certain kinds of inclusion and gender neutral restrooms. We talk, a lot of talk about restrooms for sure. Something as simple as pride flag somewhere. Agreed. Yeah, I've seen pins as well that online you can buy that says you're safe with me, with the pride flag on it, and indicating just as an individual that you can, you're someone that folks can feel good around. Diverse staff and clientele. Perfect. Co-founders of Geo Collective. Nice. Good work. And okay, perfect. So we'll take a look at the slide, and there I just wanted to add to the kinds of um, behaviors and situations that folks can have, expressed to us, either like as a gym owner or as, a leader in the community, that Flan is, about what are the things are that have either made them feel excluded or included. And, keep in mind that exclusion and bias are often unconscious or manifest as like a false rationalization or as common sense. So often addressing them in these spaces, they get, these concerns get brought up but get dismissed as well, just as quickly as they get brought up. So sometimes when we say there's no, when we hear something like there's no, I don't see color, like everyone's welcome. These are very dismissive ways of just making no effort at making sure everyone is welcome. So we're going to just take a look. You can read the things that are on the screen, but some that I wanted to highlight. Basically, I felt abandoned by my partner after my injury. So someone gets injured, we don't want to feel used by others. And in climbing, sometimes if you're rope climbing, if you get injured, we can get separated from our community, from our friends. And that's definitely something that, and some people will be more, some folks will be more, susceptible to like being excluded based on whatever reason. Yeah.
One thing that I think is a really important thing to talk about when we're talking about this like sense of community that's lacking after injury is that that can manifest in this way that's like a very subtle like ableism, right? So if there's sort of a group of people who's more likely to be having this relationship with their body that is more fraught or more complex than this other group, like having this community that can stand through or like withstand this this like not climbing can be a really big part of this inclusiveness sense.
I guess I would add to that in terms of ableism or just perceived strength, that one of the other comments I wanted to comment on was that some people felt that sometimes their progress and goals weren't taken seriously. So that either their climbing level, that can be manifested as like climbing level isn't strong enough to be for the gym or for the coaches or for trainers to be interested in that person. And again, this is all contributes to a certain, some people will be more vulnerable to that because of ableist tendencies, etc. But so there are a lot of different ways, not being hired because you were told that, this has happened more than once. I wasn't hired because I was told I don't fit the vibe. And often, unfortunately, I've seen that in setting teams in different areas. And that's just a way to say it's too difficult to include somebody different. It can just be a way to say, I don't include somebody different than what we already have going on. So yeah, there's racism, sexism, misogyny, ableism, transphobia, they can all get manifested in a way that's not a direct statement about, I don't want to see those people here. It's really can be done in such a way that it'll be subconscious or masked or veiled under some other manifestation. So and there were big shifts in the last, I guess basically over time, there have been so many shifts in terms of like social dynamics and identity. And I would say, in the 2010s, 2020s, there have been really big shifts that were not exacerbated, but heightened during the pandemic. If you think of the Black Lives Matter movement and of, the Me Too movement and those things that have happened over the last decade that, have really changed how folks feel about corporations and corporate identities using like identities for their marketing, basically. So, and you know, everyone was, I think a lot of people were really tired of corporations and politicians performing an allyship and diversity when in fact behind closed doors, their actions actually caused harm to underrepresented groups. And so if we think of like, there's a joke in June, you know, like all the corporations put their pride flag on their logo, on their socials. And then the moment that month is done, the pride flag leaves, but you know, what are they doing behind the scenes? So that's, and they're being called out for that. So then at some point, a lot of corporations were like, this is our community. And as a person who really believes in community and gets involved in community, it has led me personally to looking into what, you know, what is the definition of community? What does it mean to foster a community? Is it the fact that we all patronize the same facility or the gym group, or is it because, you know, we all climb on the same lead wall in the climbing world? What does that mean? Is it because we all go to the same crag? And I think that marketing teams really use that word to try to push this idea that they cared. And some of them did, and a lot, it was just a buzz. For many, it was just a buzzword. Sorry, I'm just, so community without connection and compassion is just a target market. That's what I've personally come to realize, but also I think that there's a lot of documentation around that. If we want it to mean more, we need to like recognize that a community is a group of individuals that gathers in a common space and time for common reasons, desires, and needs, and with shared values that act as a social contract. And our gyms are such great places to do that, because we see the same people a lot, because sports and, you know, sports can elevate our lives. They can, you know, make us champs at life in our careers. And with the right social connections and social contracts in place and support, obviously we know what sports can do for us. So sorry, so we're gonna look at, oh yeah, so we're gonna start an activity. We're gonna break down this idea of community, but we're gonna start with an activity that Flan is going to present about the spaces of the climate, of like climbing gym spaces, and how they can just from the offset have an impact on just experience.
So thank you, Jen, for explaining this idea of like how community is tying into this bigger project of what it is we're trying to create. I think one thing that I wanted to just touch on that maybe we can come back onto was something that was on the slide about responses we've heard when we're like asked like what makes you feel included in the climate community and what makes you feel excluded. And part of that is like who is also in the room. So one thing that I hear a lot is like I don't want to climb at the gym while my abuser is there. And thinking about like who is invited into that community, who is like welcomed in by virtue of either not being like held accountable for their actions or by virtue of being like really well represented in the space, and who as a result of that is being made to feel uncomfortable to be there. So with that sort of just like tied in, I want to go back to the activity slide. Thank you, Lee. And this is something I did a lot of like new Googling, I think, in trying to create this presentation. And this took me down this like Google rabbit hole of event planning and like weddings and organization and just like events that you wouldn't normally associate with like the fitness industrial complex. And I found this like one event planning blogger who was like really interested in inclusion and diversity. And they had like described this activity, and we're gonna link, I think it's on our resource page at the end, or maybe if it's not, I'll try to add it before the event is over. But they came up with this activity that was like, they draw out a floor plan of the event, and then they put themselves in someone else's shoes, as corny as that sounds, and just try to imagine every obstacle to someone being in that space that they can come up with. So I want you to do that. That's the ask here. Is if you have a piece of paper next to you, use that. If not, open up like the phone notes app, or you can even like throw in the chat. but just like walk through your home gym, whether that's like the place that you climb, the place that you work, the place you've worked in the past, whatever. Imagine a space that actually exists and try to come up with everything that's like a barrier or unexplicitly excluding like a group or explicitly including a group. So if you have questions, throw them in the chat, but just spend the next couple minutes trying to like really like walk yourself through that space. And there's some example questions on this slide as well. And this is interesting, like the example questions I wrote, obviously, some days ago. But seeing some of the things that have popped up in the chat that are really echoing these questions that came up earlier has been, yeah, just like an interesting overlap in the things. So thank you all for that. We'll give it like another 30 seconds here and then go to the next slide. And really try to think as like outside the box of something that could be like exclusionary as possible. So here I have a floor plan of it's just a random climbing gym, but if you know, you know, although I think this climbing gym actually does a good job. But what I have here is just like a floor plan of like, it's like a 2-floor bouldering gym. And what I've done is in red text, basically like follow the activity that I posited to you all just now. And again, like these are not things that are affecting me necessarily. Like I'm not someone who's been a wheelchair user in my life, but it is like a clear question. It's like, what is the wheelchair accessibility like when you're coming into this gym? If you're like in a wheelchair, like what does it look like to get on the mats? What does it look like to use like the exercise facility in the back corner? Like, what is that experience like from someone who's very dissimilar to like my experience of moving? Other things that were coming up is like language. So we're in Quebec right now, and obviously there's like very strong language laws. But where I live in the southwestern part of the U.S., like I live 45 minutes from Mexico. There's a very large like monolingual Spanish speaking population in my community, and every climbing gym in the area is exclusively in English. And not only that, but there's like not a bilingual waiver option. So even like the legal parts of this experience are like inaccessible to people who might otherwise be really benefiting from the climbing community. Similar things can be said for vision. So like what does it look like if you're a vision impaired climber and you're coming in to climb or to learn how to rock climb? Is there resources in Braille? Like again, not something that I have really any information about, but that is like a very clear way in which accessibility can be improved in the space. A couple of people have pointed out cost as well. And I think that that's a really underutilized way of increasing diversity and inclusion in these spaces. Climbing is a really incredible sport for reasons that we all understand, but it's also like really based in this sort of capitalist, colonialist understanding of like what it's like to spend time outside and this idea of like conquering and sort of beating nature or whatever. And having that tied to cost is like this way that makes it like incredibly exclusionary, incredibly like production based. I feel like there's like a very strong argument here that maybe would be an entire like other PowerPoint presentation to get into, but cost is like a huge function of exclusion. And if someone is like unable to afford the cost of a day pass, that's one thing. But if they can't afford the cost of a month pass, then like how does that change their relationship to the community if they can only go once a month instead of 10 times a month, or so on and so forth. Similar with harness sizes, I think that like climbing tends to be a really fat phobic sport, and that's something that's given very little attention to when we're like trying to design inclusive spaces. And that just starts from like purchasing the right like breadth of rental harness sizes. We talked a little bit about mat access. I heard volume talked about in the chat as something that can be really helpful or hindrance to having like an inclusive climbing space. There's a lot of like sensory things that climbing brings up for people. It can be chaotic, and having loud music can really elevate that sensation if people have other sensory stuff going on. Gender neutral bathrooms, I feel like, is kind of an obvious one, but it's really overlooked in many spaces, especially new builds. Like there's truly like no reason to not be building these gender neutral bathrooms. And Jen has a really interesting take on gender neutral bathrooms from a business owner perspective that I feel excited for her to get into. And the last thing I wanted to mention is these entry-level climbs, and just realizing like what does it take for someone to start to feel that relationship with climbing building in themselves. And so much of that is giving someone a platform on which to progress. So if they're seeing only failure from like the time that they step into the gym, perhaps from the time that their wheelchair can't get over the threshold, to the language that they don't speak, to now they can't do the rock climbs once they're in, like there's no chance of that person wanting to like come back to this sport that would otherwise maybe be a really good fit for something that they were interested in. So this may feel just like a laundry list of things that I think climbing gyms could be doing better at or something, but really what I'm trying to get at is that problems like this exist in every gym, and that doesn't mean that they have to. Like these are all choices that we're making as members of the climbing community, whether that's like gym owners or route setters or members of the community. And knowing that there's so many things that even just a little bit of change can go a really long way for getting a whole new type of people to be interested in or want to stay in a gym that they're already a member of. So I really hope that this activity can be something that you use going forward to like start to think about the ways in which you can start to change the way that your space feels.
Great. So looking at the space, I think, is one of the cornerstones of, and like the foundational pieces of making sure that your community feels welcome and can, I mean, a lot of us won't even go somewhere if we can't find parking. So if it's, you know, if for some folks it can be more than just the parking, right? It's the entire spaces of itself. So even though I think, you know, it does feel like a laundry list, I think it goes to the core of some issues. But it's part of the space is part of a bigger dynamic. So when we think about community, again, felt, and I think a lot of people feel that it's a word that has been thrown around a lot and used to kind of force a sense of belonging and be like, we care. But you know, they're a business, so do they care? So let's try to understand a little bit more the different dimensions of community, because there are so many elements that play together to build our story and our storytelling around our activities and our communities. So these are the 4 dimensions that in some research I found. So the relationships, obviously the who, the quality of the interactions, and what kind of relationships are we having? Again, like, are we colleagues? Are we climbing buddies? Are we friends? This is, we can't be the same thing to everyone that we meet within the facility. So just having an understanding of, what your role is within and how the quality of your dynamics within the gym is like the first element of community. Then there's the experiences. It's the what are we doing? And in our case, we're going to mostly talk about climbing because that's what we know anyways. The spaces, the where and the when. So, meeting up at specific times, who's climbing in the morning, who's climbing in the evening, who's climbing, and which wall are they using? Which section are they using, sorry. And then there's the stories. So that's the why. And the stories is in part, it's the beginning and the end of this whole community story. Because something led you to climb one day, or lets you to walk through that door of a climbing gym to go climb. And that's your past experience, that's your past relationships, and that's your past spaces. Maybe you didn't like the gym space, maybe you have a friend who introduced you, and maybe you quit soccer but you want to do something more individual, so that's your experiences in the past, and it's led you to have this new why, this new motivation and goals, in this case in climbing. And you're going to have your own stories around climbing. Who do you climb with? And based on the positive or negative experience of that story, you're going to bring that back into the climbing community, and it's going to feed new relationships and like what the gym offers as an experience, and how the space is perceived. So when we're talking about community, we really have to look at the interaction of everything that is happening within the space, and that while there is one larger community who, everyone likes climbing, assuming that you like climbing if you're there, there are also smaller communities. Every community has smaller groups within that community, and while there's this one common thread that brings everyone together, everyone has a different story around it because their relationships are different, or because the space affects them different, or because the climbing experience is different. So these stories are, again, it's what will keep people coming back. Our storytelling capacity taps into the same part of the brain that is, for learning and for commitment and engagement in activities, and sorry, habit forming is the expression I'm looking for. So really, you know, as a human, obviously, that's something that we want to have a positive, we want positive experiences, to have these positive memories and stories. But also as a business, it really drives your clients to create that, to, ultimately feel that sense of belonging to your space, when their stories and their experiences are positive. And it's really the most desirable emotion or outcome that a business owner could hope for, but also as individuals. And it keeps you away, like focusing on a more authentic and more authentic and human experience. It also keeps you, helps you avoid tokenism, which we won't fully address today, but we'll touch on it at certain moments. So like a more superficial approach at diversity. And I think that, and I think community, this is like, what do I say? So community also, if you're going to actually foster a community, and if you want to have a community that is engaging, and like showing up and committed, then you really need to think about the energy that you're putting back into it, and what stories you're sharing and which stories you're listening to and honoring. So we're gonna keep going on that. Sorry. And one thing that is essential when it comes to community, and it's all our human relationships, so you're not gonna be surprised, but is all of this is built on trust. And trust comes with the sense of safety, and honestly, it comes over time. So it's, and part of, once we have trust, then we can start to have difficult conversations. If your clients are not bringing up, if your community is not comfortable mentioning the things that they're uncomfortable with, it doesn't mean that they have no problems or issues. It can mean that they don't trust that they'll be heard. So developing the skill to have difficult conversations and to receive like feedback and listen with empathy is a really critical skill. It's hard to develop because I'm a very empathetic person. So when people bring criticisms, I always find it hard to hear. And this idea that people I take my job personally, and I'm really lucky to have staff that takes their job so seriously that sometimes criticism feels like a personal attack, but it's actually someone sharing about, hey, I love your business, but here's how it can be better. So there, again, we could do a whole workshop on empathetic listening, but and not just active listening. Active listening is one thing. I think it's very business oriented, but it's really anyway. So just you can start learning on it. We can discuss it. You can email me after, but we try to remember to engage in empathetic listening. But also keep in mind that it's not your individual responsibility to change every single person around you. And that's a very hard lesson to learn as well. I think that people with the social climate, people are getting into a lot of conflicts and and really long conversations that are hard, and it gets difficult emotionally, and there's no need to do that with every single person. There are approaches around that. So we'll get into the first element of the community aspect, the community experience, is the relationships. So step one, I think, in trying to create a diverse, or like serving a diverse community and becoming inclusive, is take note of who is climbing in your gym. Did they all look the same? Just if we're looking with just very superficial criteria here, do they look like the community that lives around the gym? Does the staff look like the community that lives around the gym? Does the staff look like your clientele? Like, all of these are part of a diagnosis that you have to do within your own community. And I think that in a lot of cases, for example, this is a super common example from, I would say, 10 years ago, but folks are feeling like, oh yeah, in climbing there's it's 50% women, 50% men, but then the setting teams were just one, group of cisgendered men. So that's one example. Yeah, so just take the pulse of what's going on, and think about what your goal is and what you want to achieve in developing your relationships, because you don't want to just start reaching out to people.
The other
thing is be patient. If you build it, they will come. Does not apply when it comes to diversity and inclusion. It's again, you need to build trust over time, and it's better to take small actions and focus on the quality of those interactions. It's up to you to open, you can open doors, but you can't force people to walk through and engage with the space. So small actions, and this will be manifested everyone, including management, including staff, talk to each other, make relationships outside of the gym, know the neighbors. If you work there, know the neighbors of the gym within the facility, look for mentors or mentees. If you have a lot of experience, cheer each other on. So developing these positive interactions is a really, really key part of having a positive experience. The more social connections there are, the more your community has attraction power. And take notes of which groups are underrepresented, or if they're smaller groups, maybe you want to create what are the affinity groups. Yeah, we have in certain cities, we have Queer Block and Halifax Queer Climbs, and there's a lot of different there's Roots to Roots here, which is for BIPOC folks who to connect them with the outdoors. So that's on a human level, is thinking what you want your interactions to be. Are you going to be fusion? Are you going to be part of that group? Or are you going to bridge people? Or are you going to be a liaison where you stick around a bit longer than just bridging people and be a part of, not necessarily fully invested personally, but there's different ways of connecting people. With management, when it comes to relationships, it's really, really important. The essential is to keep talking to your community. Whether it's through surveys, I think that'll come up a few times, but have different ways for your community to give you feedback. Invite other organizations into the gym, reach out. Again, open the door to groups that want to, whether it's school or affinity groups who want to give their own community athletic outlet. And I would say the biggest thing for management is to professionalize their hiring process. And that comes with not just hiring somebody because you need diversity, because I think that really cheapens, and I think a lot of people think that really cheapens the effort. Sorry to say that way, but understanding how you're hiring and why you're hiring someone and their skill set that they're bringing is the key to proper hiring. Yeah. So
I'll let Glenn
keep going.
So yeah, I think there's just so many important things on this slide. And Pedro, thank you so much for that addition into the chat about how to sort of convince management that this is a good direction to be moving in, because I think that it is such a hard take to be like, actually, Lee, if you wouldn't mind going back, sorry, that'd be great. Yeah, it's just like such a hard thing to be like, you may think that you're doing a good job of this, but when push comes to shove, like actually these diversity measures that you're taking are like not going to be beneficial to your gym in the way that you might expect. So one thing that I sort of came up for me with regards to that in terms of relationships is like how much cheaper it is to retain an employee than it is to hire a new employee. So if you can keep an employee on that you've already trained, that you've already gone through this hiring process for, you can really save a lot of money as an employer. So if your team feels like those inclusivity measures are working, then it's not that you're making money, it's that you're not losing money and having to hire another employee. And the same thing can be true for membership bases too, right? It's not that maybe you're more likely to get those new numbers of members, but if another gym opens up in your community, or in that like general neighborhood, then you're less likely to lose the members that you already have. And that's a very real thing that happens as this sort of like gym bubble is increasing, is that a new gym opens up next door and it may have everything that is like the same or even worse, like a worse setting team, worse holds. But if the vibe is better, people want to move over there. And having this conversation that's like very real with management is like, are you sitting on being the only gym in the area? And that's the thing that is setting you apart from all these other places? Or are you setting on like this idea of building a community that people actually want to be a part of? So yeah, just trying to like build this like business management part of the conversation into all these parts about community, because there is a very real like financial effects to having a more inclusive space. Another thing I want to talk about briefly was that like when we think about community and climbing, I think it's really important to think about the community that a climbing gym is in. And climbing gyms are often this like pretty big gentrifier in areas. So I'm thinking about some gyms in California that have opened up recently, that have like pushed out much smaller businesses and sort of taken a community that already existed and removed it, like made it feel very excluded, and then inserted in a new climbing community, and thinking about how many, and I hate to say this because it feels like really exploitative, but like thinking about how many more people you could get in the door if the people who already were in this area felt included and invited to rejoin this climbing community that's taken over these spaces. So having this like, on the one hand, it's financial, on the other hand, it's like talking about inclusivity, but really these things go hand in hand. Like a more inclusive space will be more successful. There's no question. It may be more difficult in the short term, but it's going to be more successful.
Doing the opposite of what empathetic. I just want to throw something into this. I know that I'm seeing the time, but I think that what Flan was bringing up is really essential. And I've read the comments about management. This is very common. I've seen a lot of facilities, management resistant to, doing anything that either could, change their brand or they feel that they already have the inclusion because people are just existing in the space. I would say that having all your eggs in one basket, like historically, just, business wise, having, if you, one thing to bring up to management is if all you're focused on is having the strong climbers and the very specific brand, then you're very vulnerable to another gym that's coming in that could come in and have a similar brand that just poach your team or just do the same thing. And I mean, we've seen it happen a lot. We're in Montreal, and Montreal has so many gyms, and I've seen it in Toronto. I've seen it in a lot of cities. So I think that diversity definitely, if you have a lot of people, but one group moves away, then you have all these other groups that are sticking around. So it's diversity in I'm gonna use the word market here because it's a more appropriate for this discussion. And with regards to the comment about the climbers being diverse and the various subpopulations, I think that that's key. And this is where we're talking about bridging. You know, you're going to have a lot of different groups climbing in the same space, but is it just, you know, again, this diversity and inclusion, how are you leveraging them with each other? How are you, you know, bringing them together? How are you having them interact through different potentially courses and stuff like that? So we'll go into that actually on another slide, but sorry. We probably talked about relationships for 2 more hours.
I mean, of course we could talk about relationships for 2 more hours because that's like that's the real crux of the issue here, is that the relationships are not working. All right, Leah, would you mind progressing? Thank you. So space is something that I feel like we've talked about a little bit already. By virtue of going through the activity together, I think that we all have maybe a better idea of like how space creates part of the experience of community. But there are some things that you can be doing as a member of that gym or as part of management. So like just communicating more about what parts of the space make you feel included, what parts make you feel excluded. And that can start as a participant in the, you know, climbing activity, or it can start as an employee, or, you know, with this new found activity, if you're a manager, like that can be like a really proactive thing you're doing. But also this is a good time to remember that this is like a living document, right? So like you might make a change and you might find that that change doesn't work, and it doesn't have the outcome that you expected or that you desired from that change, and realizing that you can make a change back or make a new change from that information. It's not like what you've done is going to be the right way to move forward forever, and that space is something that we can change. It's like it's mutable, and that's one of the really beautiful things about a space that we have like control over, like climbing. Yeah, in my personal like experience as like a rock climber and now like a pretty dedicated like activist, one thing that I really like about the climbing space, and I think that kind of brings us all into this room together, is that we get to make these decisions that have a really big impact on the community that we're a part of, in a way that feels like really different than like your local government or your school board or whatever. Like we have this really clear line of like the things that we want to change, we can change in climbing, and that's a really empowering place to be. So yeah, just like paying attention to the space as you're in it, and paying attention to the way that other people are interacting in the space. If you see a new climber walk in, like filling out the waiver for the first time, like what do they do next? Where do they get stuck? Like where are the times when they look like they don't know what they're doing and they feel confused about that? And even going so far as to like check in with them and be like, yeah, like would you like some advice, or would you like a little bit of like a tour, or can I do something to like include you in this place? And also if you hear someone who is expressing a need or desire and they feel comfortable expressing it to you, then that can be a place that you can be like leveraging your power as someone who's clearly invested in the climbing community, and echoing that again to someone who has the ability to change it. And maybe that person's not you, but it's like your friend who's the manager of the gym, or it is the owner of the gym who like will listen to you because you're an employee, hopefully. But just realizing that maybe it's not your lived experience that, you know, whatever the issue is, but you can be an advocate for other people, and you can be an advocate for times where you see people being intentionally excluded, but also unintentionally excluded. And then again, like this is part of the relationship aspect, but just like communicate. This is like, if it's communication that's happening in person, then that's a little bit more relationship building, but there's also like lots of ways to like explicitly and implicitly communicate in a building, whether that's like signage, whether that's language, whether that's arrows, whether that's like just like the space and the interior design. There are ways to communicate that. Jen, do you have anything else to say about this?
I'll have more to say about other things.
One thing that I wanted to sort of mention is that in this day and age, it can be like really appealing to like use AI to write these like measures of inclusivity when you're creating signs. And I think I would like hazard against that as someone who is like exploring a relationship with AI through school and stuff. It creates this like lack of like personability that I think can be really notable to someone who's already feeling excluded in a space. So if you are like, yeah, we're having this trans inclusive night, here's some like copy that's written by ChatGPT. I think that people who are like already on the lookout for things to sort of like talk about negatively or think, talk about negatively is not the right word, but to feel negatively about that reaching out or that like pink washing are going to really notice that there's like a lack of like human on the other side of that AI. So yeah, realizing that like maybe it's better to just like write the flyer and be wrong about it, take the criticism about being wrong, and then use that to write your own flyer again better. Because as we see AI becoming more important and more like used in these spaces, I think we're going to see like a deadening of the personalities that are so important in climbing, and also an increase of the biases that are already inherent to AI.
We're learning from humans after all. So, so now we'll just continue on with the experiences. So, sorry, sorry, guys. So experiences, climbing is a lot of things to everyone. It's not just sports. It's not just social. It's a social, it can be cultural, it's collaborative, and it can be emotional for sure. So kind of respecting the place that it has in people's lives. Again, it can elevate, our relationship with sports can really elevate our own lives and experiences, and they can also sports can also harm us, not just physically but emotionally. We just have to use examples of other sports that I will not name, but like that are team sports, and where coaching has gotten out of and it can create a really bad and very negative experience, and really have an impact on a person's life. So I think climbing is this incredible platform that we have to give the community a mix of like an experiential mix of that kind of fuels their physical well-being, their mental well-being, their emotional well-being, and can bring them together with others. And again, I know there's a lot of arguments for against not being bothered to do community nights, but it's really this kind of sense of belonging to a space that will create clients for a very, very long time, because they have a positive experience. And honestly, having a negative experience, so having like a space where they don't like an experience where they don't feel like something is for them, if there's no courses that target like their level, if there's not enough beginner climbs, if there's not down climb jugs is a battle that I've had in the past, like a very long time ago, and I've seen other gyms battle with. But often changes that get brought to address a specific need of like a request from one person, if it's adapting to somebody's specific fear or like access issue, often it will benefit the whole community. Down climb jugs aren't just for people who are scared, they're also for people who don't want to hurt themselves or protect their knees and climb as long as they want. So really, again, we're not going to say this enough. If you haven't heard it already, like, communicate with your client, listen to what they have to say. If somebody says, hey, like that fall on that boulder is, it's scared, I found it a little scary, like, pay attention to that. Don't dismiss them as just don't dismiss their concern as just having to toughen up, or whatever people say about those things. But pay attention to who's being listened to, in terms of when concerns are being brought to you, and that is like the number one thing, first of all, for your community. In terms of individuals within this, part of a member of a climbing community or a staff, the things that we can do are like talk about our own concerns and think about solutions. So if you're approaching a manager, if you're approaching someone, bring that concern up. I can tell you, as a person who has gyms, that if one person brings we're pretty good at listening to individual concerns, but I also realize, like, everyone, people who bring concerns don't realize that maybe 5 other people have brought that same concern before, and we'll just act more quickly if that happens. Sometimes it takes a bit longer, but yeah. So there's some people, who's being listened to on their first try. Pay attention to those things. Their first first complaint, who gets listened to, at their first attempt, and who has to be the greasy wheel that repeats themselves like 25 times. Like, look at those things within your space. If you have sorry, I'm going through this list a little all over the place, but and that basically means like dream big about what a gym could be. So again, bring your concerns, bring your solutions as proposals for improving the experience and making it easier to enjoy the space and the product that that gym is offering. I mean, again, there's no guaranteed outcome here, but there's an approach, and that's what we're aiming for here. Talk to your coworkers about representation and about your working conditions. I know that's probably not a popular thing for me to say as a business owner, but we've kind of accepted that it's happening anyways. I don't think we have anything to hide. When it, like, just historically, when in research based on working conditions or even like salary negotiations, there's so much data out there about how there's discrepancies between genders, and so information and knowledge is power, and that's a really important thing. And so talk about those working conditions. Bring your expertise and concerns to management. So if you have a specific skill set, or if you see specific things, bring them up. And then I have a lot of things to say for gym owners. So I think that we, as gym owners, there's a lot of stuff that folks, I've heard a lot when we started Big, people said, well, what do you mean? Like, we don't even get CVs from women, or we don't, we're open to hiring, but no one's applying. But then when we created Big, we got, like, for 6 workshops, 125 applications for those workshops. So honestly, I think at this point, the question is not, oh, why is not like, what are they doing? It's more like, what are we doing as an industry that is holding people back from applying for these jobs or from participating in this space? And often it's really a starting at your own behavior as a business. That it can start with training staff. Invest in super basic, like, workshops for creating proper hiring, job postings, like job descriptions, identifying like the real needs of a job, as opposed to what you're extremely biased and like imperfect job descriptions that are based only on like an internal measure of what, like, I'm going to use this example again, but what a route setter should be, or who should be teaching your courses. So it can also mean training in terms of communication for your management. It can mean training to do interviews properly. It's worth the investment, because your managers and your full-time staff are often the ones who are going to stay for a while, and as you invest in them, they will stay longer. I would also say hire based on these values as well. Like, inquire about their approach, what their approach would be to hiring. Inquire about how they would approach to diversity and inclusion. The other thing that makes a huge difference is if complaints come in about harassment or conflicts, look into them, listen, talk to everyone involved confidentially, make sure everyone stays confidential, and reprimand those who aren't. It's essential. Don't tolerate gossip, don't tolerate rumors in your space, and don't participate them, especially as gym owner or manager. And if it's not for harassment, then if you want to reach out to your community about their experience within your gym, then create professional and anonymous pathways for feedback for members and employees. And so those are like the things that are very administrative on the owner side. But then there's also things that you can do, like giving affinity groups space to organize their own events, reaching out to, we're put them on the resources. There are already groups that are organizing events with organizing events with affinity groups or with the local organizations, and speak to your climbers about the sorry, about their experience on the climbs. Are there enough climbs in their level, etc. Sorry, there's a lot. Yeah, so then we can go on. Yeah.
Can I jump in for a moment?
Yeah.
Be really fast. One thing that is sort of going back to this idea of like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good, is that sometimes even the experience of saying that you're having this concern with accessibility or inclusivity in the gym, and having that just being heard, even if the next step is never like done, just knowing that this is a gym that listens to these complaints and listens to these concerns really actively, and if it makes sense to address them, it will address them. And that can be even like a really big step in terms of like just like having a space where people feel empowered to make these like give people this feedback.
Thanks. And some more from me. So, and this all leads to the story. So the climbing, like, are there enough down climb jobs? Are there enough climbs for me? Are there, like, is this product reflecting, how, like, a positive interaction, or create a positive interaction between me and or between your client and your space. So, it brings people back to like why they climb. So what is your community narrative? Like what's going on in your facility? And I think like this is not in my presentation, but I realize a lot of gyms have their own personalities. Like you'll know when you walk into a gym, it has its personality, and then the groups, the smaller groups interact within there. And stories play, as I mentioned, a role in the section of our brain that helps us learn and adopt habits and behaviors. So it really can cement a clientele's engagement with you and commit to like long-term patronage of your business. And the other, and so also on an individual level, when you share your story and your personal narrative, it can help others develop that sense of belonging. Like, hey, there are people who have those same fears as me, or it can help them take that chance. And one thing as a founder of B.I.G, like I questioned, this is just a tiny example, but like when we decided to create B.I.G and we had launched it and we had made a website and we had money from North Face and we had, workshops set up across the country, and we had plan lined up to do the workshops, and we were going to announce the workshops. And the day before I was second guessing myself. And sometimes, hearing about other people's fear or situation or experience and their relationships it helped to motivate, like, for me to find the courage to continue with B.I.G and to do it over the last few years, because I continue personally to be, you'll probably notice me at the beginning of the presentation, like get nervous about these kinds of situations, like presenting or taking any kind of leadership, and I feel uncomfortable with it a lot. So I found, again, this is very personal, but that sharing, being vulnerable about that fear and about that, about those thoughts, I know that it has led to other people kind of taking steps to do their own thing. So you can each find, your thing within your community that you feel comfortable enough to be vulnerable about and share to make somebody else feel welcome. And think about, as gym owners and as employees, what is the narrative that's shared by your gym? And if you're going to do that, if you're going to, share about like the things that you do, make sure that your actions behind it, back up what you're saying. Don't just do an ad and go to the one person of color in your gym and decide that you want them in your ad to show that you're diverse. That's terrible and very superficial and a really horrible way of doing diversity. So again, understand the needs of your community and really, make sure you're interacting with them all the time. And don't forget that, like, when you reach out for stories and you make sure to go and find those things that people want to say to you but aren't, you may be, if you're not doing that, you may be missing critical information about your business. You may be missing critical information that will prevent you from facing a lawsuit about something, or like, or that's making you miss out on an entire clientele that you didn't know about. And ultimately, when we're thinking about creating a sense of belonging, so having the stories and, folks feeling like they're not just a checked box in the community, it really involves three key ingredients: the energy that's put into the dynamics, into the relationships, into the time and the focus and the interactions, the individualization. So making sure that they're not just a spokesperson for their entire demographic when they're in your gym, that they're, you see them as who they are, and respect that, and future orientation. So make sure that that person feels like there's a long-term vision for them there, that you see them as part of your community over time. So that's, yeah, again, there's no guarantee of outcome. You just, think about these things when you are trying to create the conditions to have a more inclusive environment.
Can I jump in really fast about stories and sort of bring it to this point that feels like a little bit maybe like, I think that the idea of a story is so powerful, and that's the thing that we're all drawn to in climbing in some way. But one thing that I've found to be really empowering in my own relationship with climbing is thinking about the part of climbing that is the most powerful to me, and like the thing that I like the most about rock climbing, and then going out of my way to try to share that with other groups. So just for instance, like something that's been really successful in my small climbing community in Tucson is that I was like, I love the problem solving aspect of climbing, and like the trust building and the community aspect, and that's something that I really want to be able to share with other groups. So I like went out of my way to like find a group that find a group that works with like refugee and asylee kids, and was like, hey, like what's it gonna take to get these kids to go rock climbing? Like I can hook you up with a space and maybe it's free, but is this something you all are interested in? And this has created like a really incredible relationship between me and this group and the climbing gym. And it's really like brought in like a lot of conversations that we're able to have in this like honestly pretty suburban, pretty white climbing gym. So just realizing that like we're all in climbing because of these stories, and that we can go out and try to share the things that we love about climbing with other people in a way that can be really productive. So this is sort of just like a recap slide. I feel like we're running a little short on time, so maybe we can just leave this as a resource later. But I just wanted to thank you all so much for coming to this presentation and for giving us the privilege of sharing these ideas with you, and also for being invested in and interested in building like a more diverse and inclusive climbing community, because I think it is just clearly something that we all are really striving for and really need. So thank you for that. Thank you for trusting us with your time. I really appreciate it. And thank you to the B.I.G Initiative for doing such an incredible thing and making this project be so impactful and so long lasting. I think it's really incredible what you all have done.
Amazing. And thank you both for these deep insights on diversity and inclusion through the lens of relationships, spaces, and experiences and stories. We do have a resource page on the next slide that maybe we can sit on in our final minutes here while we address some questions from you, the lovely participants. If you have any, feel free to populate them. We did send out an email to everyone who registered before our session if there were any other questions that folks wanted to have addressed in today's training. So the one that we have here, while we have folks write into us, this could go to either Jen or Flan, maybe both of you, but I'm curious, in what ways does having a diverse setting team impact the community?
I love this question. Can I answer this question?
Yeah.
So I could have another PowerPoint presentation about just this question, but basically climbing is really unique because we as route setters get to define the playing field that defines then the success of what it means to be a rock climber. And that's not true if you're climbing outside, but in this instance of like talking about climbing gyms, like we get to tell you what it means for you to be good at this sport. And it can be incredibly variable. Like I could set you a boulder that if you were over 5 feet tall, you would have no chance of climbing. Or I could set you a boulder that if you were over 6 or under 6 feet tall, you have no chance of climbing. And I get to decide as a route setter or as part of a route setting team what it means to be good at rock climbing in that gym. So if you have a route setting team that's creating the same type of boulder route that's then benefiting the same type of body or relationship to movement or movement style or whatever, then you're going to see those people reflected in the people who are coming into the gym, because they're going to see the success, they're going to have the story, they're going to have the experience that then leads them to want to come back. Alternatively, if you have a route setting team that's very diverse, if you have a lot of different body types, if you have a lot of different like racial identities, if you have a lot of different just like experiences of living in the world, all those lived experiences are going to add up into being a very different route setter with a very different route setting style. And that can be, it's often talked about in terms of gender, like these are men's boulders or women's boulders or whatever. But that type of different relationship to movement can be everything. I mean, it can be like, if you're a Black American, you move differently in the world than white Americans. Alternatively, if like you are a fat climber, like you're going to move differently in the world than someone who's not fat. And just keeping this thing in mind when you're trying to build a route setting team is like the people who are making the product should very much as possible reflect the people who you want to be using that product.
Love that. Jen, did you want to add anything about diverse setting teams impacting the community?
I mean, I think it has also a really big impact in terms of visibility. It's one of the most visible jobs other than front desk. And I think that it informs definitely like the grade and the range, the repertoire of movements. So I think but that's just stuff that Flan said anyways. So.
Awesome. Okay, lots of great questions flowing in here. One from Pedro. I felt like working in a gym, I would have a bit more power on building up the space from the inside out. Having met resistance on that end, what do you think might be the best way to build up a space from the outside in?
I want to answer this one too.
Start.
Okay. Jump in whenever you want to. That's such a good question. And I think that it is really easy to feel disenfranchised when you're an employee of a route setting or of a route setting gym. Obviously, you know where my head's at, but of a rock climbing gym. And you're like, it's really hard to be active in this space because all of a sudden my like financial security is at risk, which means my housing's at risk, which means whatever. So having your employment tied up and trying to do this like activist work can be like really limiting. And in some ways that leads to this like more powerful position from being on the outside. So I think that you can take a lot of inspiration from community organizing in lots of different spheres, whether that's like union organizing or that is just like community building or talking about whatever issues like we've been talking about in these things. But like maybe drawing inspiration from like bus riders unions or things where there's like not employees, but just like clients or customers of these services and seeing how they make very like actionable change in these areas. Because climbing is incredibly siloed. It's like a very isolated place, I think intentionally for a lot of reasons. But there's just like so much incredible work happening in areas outside of climbing that we can take inspiration from. So talking to other members of the gym, looking at the work that Trans Climbers Belong has done in order to change, long story short, kind of change USAC's like trans athlete participation policy is like a really good example of ways that people are organizing within climbing to make it more inclusive. But yeah, just like affinity group building, using your power as like a group of people who pay that company money to make the changes happen that you want to see. I hope that's helpful. And if you have more questions, like I would love to talk about this off thread.
Yeah, I think that the really some really successful, and again, I can only speak for, it can only come from my specific experience. But I know that it has also worked in other gyms where, if you're involved personally with an organization that that is outside, and you just organizing a climbing activity, that's a really easy, simple way, and actually will most likely make them the group that you're accompanying feel more welcome in the space because you want them there and because they're with you and you love climbing. We have many groups that do this in our facilities. They, you know, we have even, so this is one thing as well, like you can offer to get trained as, you know, an instructor, like a group animator. If you have in Quebec, we have the FQME. They give certifications for that, so that you're like just responsibility wise, you know, you can negotiate that with the gym so that they feel that you're certified, or you go through whatever training, but that you go on your own time, and bringing groups often into the space. Honestly, again, you know, the more positive interactions, the better, and I think it helps to change the dynamic inside the gym. So we have groups for kids, like at-risk youth, that come climb. We have kids, you know, with special needs that come climb. We have different organization for people of color, like the LGBTQIA plus community. We have, you know, and on one hand, I think that I can tell you as business owners, we feel overwhelmed sometimes with the amount of stuff that we have to do and that we're responsible for. So I think that when you remove that like sense of putting it on their shoulders too, and if you feel that this is within your bandwidth to do, because please respect your own mental health as well. You know, and it can be like once a month, but if it's something that you're like, hey, I just want to accompany them, how can we make this work? It's a really good start. And find allies within the staff. Honestly, like, you know, build that little community we have, you know, build that little community of your own within the gym. But it, again, it's built over time, and just because it doesn't work immediately doesn't change everything. It doesn't mean that it won't like in the future. So don't give up. Wow, there are a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's some amazing questions here. Thank you so much, Doris, for these super thoughtful questions. I wish we had time to answer all of them, but maybe we can squeeze in one or two more. Maybe one for you to kick us off with, Jen, but climbing gyms bring together people with really different needs, like someone visiting for the first time and others training for big goals. How do you approach balancing those different experiences while also managing the financial realities of running a gym?
Um, it's very, again, it's like knowing when to, like, what can you do yourself? So what resources do you have within the gym? What can you do with your staff that you have at the moment? What is within your capacity? And then so that's like, you know, if you have a rope gym, like for sure, you know, you have the beginner courses, and we make sure that those are a huge priority, because no matter what, like if you want your gym to be successful, you have to initiate people to climbing. Like you cannot get away from that. So I would say this is a really critical point here. But then of course you're going to want to have the you know, the other folks who want to train more specific. It's been really, I'm assuming that this question also kind of targets like the youth teams that take up a lot of space and require a lot of resources. But we have found that like the stuff that we have to buy for the teams to have them train, you know, to get them to achieve their own goals, when we've let the community at large use them outside of the training times, it has been hugely beneficial to everybody. You know, and even giving, like, for example, like the kilter board, like having intro nights on the kilter board, because some people won't touch these things, these tools, if they don't get an initiation. I think to some extent there's a gender um a gendered approach here, because everyone, you know, there's like social stuff about like how women and men and, you know, people who've been socialized, female and male, have like approach new activity, like sports activities. But I would say again, you know, when stick to what you know, like stick to climbing, and then if you see what capacity you have, and if there's something specialized that you want to do on a more on a more like single event basis, then you can add those with, you know, hiring, you know, somebody to teach that course for that one time, but not necessarily take them on um uh, as a staff. So yeah, I don't know if that answers
Totally.
entirely, but I think it
I think that definitely touches on some core pieces there. Um, we let's address one last question, maybe
Mhm.
before we wrap things up here. I know we're just at time, but I think this is a good one, and maybe Flan, you can kick us off with an answer to this. But how do we respectfully call out staff or other community leaders who are accidentally racist, sexist, ableist, etc.?
This is a really hard question, and I don't pretend to have the right answer. But what I can do is call us back to some of the themes we touched on earlier, which is that like it's never going to be the exact right way to do it, and all that we can do to like practice having this sort of like call in instead of call out culture, as cheesy as that feels, also is to just like try to do better every time. So things that I think are really important to focus on are sort of trying to understand the perspective or maybe lack of perspective that might lead to comments that comments or actions that have been intentionally or unintentionally like exclusionary. And sometimes understanding a little bit more of where that person is coming from can be a really good step to helping them get to the level where they can be then a little bit better informed, and by that virtue be like a little bit more inclusive. But I also want to go back to something that Jenna said a lot, which is that you want to do this within your own ability and within the ways that you feel comfortable doing that as someone who might be like a target of some of those exclusionary things. So from my own perspective, like as a very like well-established root setter, I have a lot of space to be calling people in or out as sort of as needed or as I think would be like helpful for the community. But that's definitely a privilege that's afforded to me by virtue of like my experience within the climbing community. So realizing that not everybody has that relationship to power. And that might mean that like someone else could be like in a more powerful position to have that relation or that communication with the person who's doing these like ableist or racist or sexist things. It is really easy as like a minority group to be like the person who needs to like tell like the bros like what is acceptable or not, and that's a really exhausting place to be. Something I've experimented with, well, not experimented with, but thought about doing is invoicing for times that I've done that. So if you're like, if someone's like, is this sexist? And you're like, yeah, probably. And here's a $50 invoice that you can give me later. But all jokes aside, yeah, it's really hard to do it correctly. I think that the thing that is important is that it like needs to be done. And it's probably gonna not work sometimes. And that doesn't mean that it's not important. And I hope that's helpful sort of stepping stone, but there's also a lot of really good resources for this out there.
If I can just jump in here as well. My biggest role within the gyms is to do HR or like harassment related stuff, or and sometimes it's not harassment, it's literally these specific situations where it was, you know, it's like probably the intention was not to harm anyone, but the impact was harmful. And as Flan mentioned, it's really essential to address these things quickly. Don't wait too long, because then it's just it is just weird. You know, they'll forget they'll forget you know, what the specifics of what they did. But things to keep in mind if you're going to address it, I think, you know, there is a lot of shame on both sides on this. I hate using that specific sentence structure, but sometimes people resist change because they feel shame because they don't know how to adapt. And when, you know, and this is one area where, you know, if you have the bandwidth for it and you have that capacity to demonstrate empathy and compassion, and compassion is a rational thing, you know, it's like there's a judgment around this. It's like, can I do this? Do I have the words to say this? Do I need somebody else with me? But basically, you know, recognize that this person will likely experience shame around being called out, and maybe they're a horrible person, it happens all the time, but maybe it was really an accident. And so I would take them aside privately, definitely. Maybe you need somebody else there as your support, that's very possible. And address specific behavior. Don't, you know, try not to use labels, try not to say, you know, try not to attribute intention, because that's where I think conflicts really stem from. But attempt, you know, give context, like, hey, I was behind the cash register earlier and you were doing a transaction and for a client and you said, XYZ, and then express how it made you feel. This made me feel this way. Maybe in the future you shouldn't use that kind of language, in the facility. So say your needs as well, how it impacted you or how you think it impacted that person, and then how, what you want to see, what you think would be the appropriate behavior in the future. So I don't, again, you stay away from judgment of the person themselves. That's, when we start attacking somebody's integrity, it goes sideways. You're going to have a conflict. And when we, in the method I just described is a form of nonviolent communication. It does not guarantee outcome. Again, I can't say that enough, but I think that if you take the person away privately and you describe just their actions are things we can change. If I feel judged personally, it's like, I can't change who I am as a person, but I can change my actions and I will reflect on them the next time. So try again. So privately address specific behavior, describe how it made you feel and what you would prefer to see, what you need in the future from that person. And if you can't do it, then obviously talk to management or somebody about it. But yeah, that's my recommendation just for like the day-to-day. But it does need to be addressed because that will grow into a very, very big conflict if these things aren't addressed. I think that's a guarantee. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you both for those tangible approaches to how we can address those kind of situations. And for everything that you shared and to the policy, so many folks dedicated to this kind of subject and the change that needs to happen. So thank you all for being here and engaging in this conversation. We've talked about the barriers that exist, the behaviors that can shift culture, and the real opportunities that we all have to make climbing gyms more inclusive and diverse. Remember, the goal is not to fix everything at once. It's about progress, not perfection. So thank you to each of you for showing up, for listening, and being willing to do the work. Building a more diverse and welcoming community really does start with the choices that we all make. So let's keep the conversation going in our gyms, in our communities, and on the walls we climb together. And yeah, thanks again, everyone. Have a great evening.
Thank you all so much. And thank you to everyone who supported B.I.G while we were doing it. It was an incredible time.
Thanks. It's really an honor to be a part of this.